Hello, everyone, and welcome to week 3 of the Plant Powered Challenge. I hope you are all enjoying yourselves, getting inundated with lots of great information that's hopefully helping you on your health journeys. I am super excited for today's session. I'm joined by Krista Gast. She is a registered dietitian and national board certified health and wellness coach for Corewell Health's lifestyle medicine team. Krista has over 20 years of experience supporting and empowering patients and the community to take charge of their own health and realize their own unique vision of wellness. With expertise in both clinical and culinary nutrition, she aims to take the guesswork out of healthy eating by inspiring people to get into their kitchens and cook delicious food that also happens to support their health. Since Krista has her own personal journey with inflammatory bowel disease, she has learned firsthand the power food and lifestyle choices have on gut health and how we can use that to improve our total health. It is her passion to help people improve their gut health through food and lifestyle behaviors to feel better and to live a healthier, longer life. With that, I'm super excited to introduce you to Krista Gast. Welcome, Krista.
Thank you. So happy to be here. I'm so excited to talk about this topic, as you know, and as you beautifully said, definitely my passion. So I always get excited to talk about gut health. So I'm so glad I get the opportunity to do that today. So thanks for having me. You're week 3 of the Plant Powered Challenge, which is so exciting. And so I hope all of you have been having a really fun and hopefully at times adventurous time as you're adding more plants to your diet. Hopefully that we're helping you along with that. Explore all that with all of our recipes and fun stuff that you're getting every week. So glad to add on to that today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. I'm having a little bit of a problem here. It was fine right before right before we joined, of course. So bear with me here while I try to do this again so I can make sure I'm sharing it correctly. You never know what you're going to get with technology. I find that every day. It's always a surprise for me. So, okay, so we're going to jump into gut health today. I know this is a hot topic. So hopefully there's lots of you on here excited to learn about this. So today we're going to learn about what the microbiome is. We hear about the microbiome, but what is it really? How gut health impacts our entire body. Yep, that's right. Not just how the gut feels, right, physically, but also how that can impact the rest of our body from head to toe, really. And then we're going to discover, how can we do this? How can we create a healthy, stronger gut through the food that we eat? What are some changes that we can make to make our gut stronger? So what I'll also say to start with is that gut health is pertinent for everybody, not just for those that are experiencing actual symptoms of gut health. Of course, it rises to importance when we're experiencing that, but also for those of you that don't maybe have actual symptoms, your gut needs to be working for you. And you're going to learn about that today and just the impacts it can have body wide for us. So important for everybody listening today. So the microbiome is a large community of microbes. So about 39 trillion microbes that are living in our gut. Sounds like just unfathomable, right? 39 trillion. We technically, clinically, we can term this the microbiota, but we're not going to split hairs today. We're going to say microbiome just as our overarching word. But we are actually more than 100 times more microbes than human cells. So just wrap your mind around that for a second, right? We're actually made up more of microbes than we are human. So you can see already how important microbes are and how important it is for us to be taking care of them. So your microbiome is actually as unique as your fingerprint is. So that means there is not another person on this planet that has a microbiome that looks like yours. So that explains a lot, I feel, when it comes to, how one person can tolerate a certain diet and the next person may not. And that all comes down to that microbiome and just how individual and unique that is. So that can explain some of what we experience with that. The microbiome impacts, like I said when we first started today, microbiome impacts us body wide. So here's some really big ways that the microbiome influences this. So immunity, it has a really big impact on immunity, metabolism, gene expression, and even our cognition, our mood, our brain health. So we're going to dig into each of these here a little bit. But first, I want to share one of my favorite quotes. Whoops, I went backwards. Sorry about that. So one of my favorite quotes from Hippocrates. So probably the most famous quote is, "Let thy food be thy medicine, and thy medicine be thy food." This is another one. This is probably my favorite just because of my affinity for gut health. But all disease begins in the gut, and that could not be more true. And I hope that you leave today really having a better understanding of that and just how important it is for us to take care of our gut health, because it really truly does, our health truly does begin in our gut. So we're going to start with looking at what a healthy, happy gut looks like, and also what a more angry gut can look like. So you see here on this slide, we have dysbiosis on the right, and we have gut homeostasis on the left. So you can definitely tell, I think, by looking at these two images, which side is angrier, right? Our dysbiosis, that is where we have this kind of angry gut. Things are not going as they should. Gut homeostasis, on the other hand, this is where everything's living in harmony and the gut is nice and healthy and it's able to function as it should. So when we get a loss of diversity, and that means the microbes living in our gut, when we start to lose diversity of those microbial strains, then that means we start to shift the balance in the gut microbiome into a less healthy balance, meaning that we have more of the unfriendly bacteria that are thriving and less of the good guys that are thriving. So what happens is we start to get the gut wall kind of attacked, where we start to get these holes in the gut wall that's supposed to normally be very tight and protective, like we see on the side of the slide that says gut homeostasis there. So under dysbiosis, this is where now the gut wall has been under attack and we start to get these gaps in the gut wall. That's normally supposed to be our barrier, but now we get very inflammatory compounds that are leaking through. So you might have heard the term leaky gut. Leaky gut, it's all over, right? All you have to do is look up gut health on the internet, and I'm sure several sites about leaky gut will pop up. And that's essentially what is happening here. That's what ends up happening, is that gut wall becomes what we call more permeable. So things can leak through that shouldn't. And so they can get in the bloodstream and they can wreak havoc and cause inflammation throughout the body. So here's one reason one way how the gut can impact the health of the rest of your body. So in some cases, when this dysbiosis gets really overwhelming, so this a really great example would be in really severe COVID-19 cases that happened when we first were kind of in this COVID-19 pandemic, and people were being hospitalized. There was an overwhelming inflammatory response that happened. So what happens is we get overwhelming amounts of a compound called bacterial endotoxin. So bacterial endotoxin is one of these compounds that can slip through that gut wall when that gut wall isn't nice and tight. So in this dysbiosis, and it causes a lot of issues. When we have it just dumping out into the bloodstream, this is where we get this overwhelming, overreacting immune system happening. And then we end up in big trouble body-wide with conditions like sepsis. So that gives you kind of a clear picture of what happens in these is really severe acute illnesses that can happen. But we also see this lead to chronic illnesses or chronic inflammation. So that begs the question of, is dysbiosis the root cause of chronic disease? What do you think? Yeah, in many cases. So what are we eating? How is diet and lifestyle coming in and affecting our gut health? So we are eating a lot more processed foods, and that has detrimental effects to our gut microbiome. So as you see here on this slide, 6 in 10 of us here in the United States actually have one of these chronic diseases listed on the slide. And this is definitely not a comprehensive list, but these are some of our top ones. So either you yourself or maybe somebody you know struggles with one of these chronic diseases, and 4 in 10 adults actually have 2 or more. So those are big numbers, right? What are we doing? What is going on here? What are we doing wrong? So with advancements in technology over the last 50 years, this has resulted in a food system that gives us cheaper, easier to eat processed foods. There's a ton of plant foods, whole foods that we can be eating that are available to all of us that can provide us with these great nutrients that we need, which we'll dig into a little bit later in the presentation. But there's actually an estimated 300,000 edible plant foods on this planet that are available to us, yet more than half of our body's energy needs are met by mainly 4 plant foods, and that would be rice, potatoes, wheat, and corn. So these are our big crops, but most of these too, by the time we're eating them, are highly processed and highly refined. So we lose a lot of nutrients. So in order to prevent, manage, or reverse chronic disease, if we have a hope for that, then we must eat plants in our diet and have a diverse selection of them. This is also pertinent for gut health and building a strong gut. I'm not going to get into that quite yet. So a really interesting study out of France where they took 33,000 French adults and found that the more ultra processed foods, so these are the foods that are insanely highly processed, right? So even think of potato chips, that's an ultra processed food. The higher the more ultra processed foods they ate, the higher their risk of irritable bowel syndrome. A lot of you on here might be familiar with that. Those that had the highest consumption increased their risk of digestive problems overall by up to 39%. So that's a significant increase just by increasing these ultra processed foods that are just rampant in our food system nowadays. So I want to talk a little bit about health span versus lifespan. So what's the difference between the two, health span versus lifespan? So we're living longer, right? We have medical advances that can keep us living longer lives in numbers, but are we actually living better in those years? So I love this definition by Dr. David Katz. Dr. David Katz is a physician that specializes in preventive and lifestyle medicine. And he says it beautifully. I can't say it better than this. So he says health span versus lifespan is adding years to life and life to years. Absolutely, right? So yes, we want to add life to our years, but we can't just be, or we want to add years to our life, but we can't just be focused on that. Because if we just focus on that, and maybe we're taking pills to take care of symptoms of things and we're kind of putting band-aids on stuff, we're not thinking about what's the quality of those years that we do have, right? We're striving to add more years, but we also have to think about quality. So interestingly, the American Heart Association actually reported in 2020 that life expectancy in the United States is around 78 years of age. But the health span here in the United States is at 66 years of age. So that's a big gap. So that means there's about a 14-year gap that we have here in the United States between living and actually living well. So that's that gap between health span and lifespan. We want to make sure we're living better for those years. So that's 14 years in that gap. And that's on average. There's a lot of people where it's much longer than that. But those are years we're living riddled by chronic disease. Some of these listed here on the slide. And that's not a great way to live, right? We might be living going in and out of the hospital, going to doctor's appointments, not physically being able to do the things that we want to be doing. So then we've significantly cut down on that health span. And we want to do as much as we can to increase that. So let's talk a little bit about some of these things I introduced to you on the earlier slides and how the gut can impact some of these kind of departments in our bodies. So immunity is a really big one. And this is one you hear about a lot when you hear people talk about gut health, because 70% of your immune system is actually located right on the other side of your gut wall. So we can see just in the proximity of the gut and the immune system that they may have a lot of contact, right? So picture your gut as the outside world, right? So everything you eat, you drink, you breathe, what you put on your skin is going to get to your gut at some point. So that's the outside world. And that intestinal barrier here that we're seeing again, just in a different picture, that intestinal barrier is to protect the rest of your body from being exposed to that quote unquote outside world. So we want to try to keep that gut wall nice and tight. But what's interesting is that the gut plays a really critical role in communicating with the immune system. So the gut actually helps to regulate that immune system, keep it from over-regulating, but also keep it from under-regulating. When we have an over-regulation, that's where we see autoimmune diseases come into play. And when we're under-regulating, that's where we may be more susceptible to infections, also cancer development too. So a lot of heavy responsibility there that the gut has. So in immunity, these are some things we might talk about when we're talking about immunity. We're talking about asthma, food allergies. Yes, that is an immune response. Inflammatory bowel disease, rheumatoid arthritis, skin conditions like psoriasis and eczema, seasonal allergies. And this is a short list. This is not an all-inclusive list, definitely. But these are some of our biggest, most common ones that we see people struggle with. But we can have the hope to improve some of these conditions by helping to strengthen our gut and heal our gut. So definitely important, not only in avoiding cold viruses and other viruses out there, but also for a whole host of other chronic conditions that can pop up as a result of this dysbiosis. So it'll show up in all of us differently, just based on what our makeup is. We also see dysbiosis, this gut dysbiosis, have a significant impact on metabolism. So a lot of people like to think like gut health is separate, right? And how could that possibly be affecting me and my difficulty losing weight? But I'm here to tell you that it does. And it can make it very challenging for you to manage a healthy weight. So we see here that dysbiosis can wreak havoc with obesity, hyperlipidemia, so our high cholesterol levels, chronic kidney disease, which we're seeing more of now in younger folks, type 2 diabetes, very well known, I think, to all of us, coronary artery disease, and then NASH, which is non-alcoholic fatty liver disease. So these are all conditions that are related to how our metabolism is functioning. So it's not all about calories in, calories out. It's much more complicated than that. So evidence suggests that our microbes might actually even control our appetite. We have a couple of different hormones called ghrelin and leptin. Ghrelin is our hunger hormone. Leptin is our satiety hormone, where we feel satisfied and feel like we don't need to eat anymore. So our gut microbes actually can play a role in the regulation of those. Also involved in insulin sensitivity. So that's where the type 2 diabetes comes in. Also pre-diabetes. Pre-diabetes, we're seeing more and more and more now. And you may even have noticed it. Maybe you've gotten your labs done and your doctor's like, ooh, your numbers are creeping up there a little bit, getting a little bit of insulin resistance. Our gut can actually play a role in helping us better manage that. So a lot of different things in metabolism. And I want to show you this. This has always been fascinating to me since this came out. So this was a study that was done using mice where they transplanted microbiomes into mice to see just what kind of role does the microbiome play in weight gain. So obese microbiomes from obese mice were transplanted into a sterile microbiome of mice. And these mice that they were transplanted into were underweight, and all were fed the same amount of calories and food. Those transplanted with the obese microbiome actually became obese, despite that there were no changes in the diet whatsoever. And those fed the underweight microbiome were underweight. And those fed the normal microbiome had a normal weight. So here we see, this was the beginning actually, where we started to really see just how important the gut microbiome is in managing weight. So this is a really fantastic study. I have it referenced here on the slide. It's in the journal Nature, which is one of our top journals. extremely picky about what goes in this journal. So this is actually a really great study, and we've seen some of this stuff duplicated since then. But this was kind of beginning of that discovering of that. So really fascinating. Gene expression. So this is one of the other bullet points that we had and what the gut microbiome influences. So gene expression is exactly what it sounds like. It's where your genes express themselves. So we all are handed or passed down DNA, right? From our parents and our grandparents and so on, going back. So we often think that the DNA or the genes that we've been dealt, that's it, right? Because we see some of these chronic diseases like heart disease, diabetes, weight concerns, all these different things that we feel like are passed down in our family through the generations. So we feel like I'm destined to get this chronic disease, right? No, you are not, especially with these chronic diseases I just mentioned that are of, we can modify what happens with that, and we can try to help our genes not express themselves. So picture, just like on the slide here, picture your genes like a light switch. So your lifestyle choices and diet being probably one of the biggest is what turns them on and off. So there are things that we can do to change our destiny with this. So hopefully that helps you feel a little bit more empowered. Like you do have some choice in that matter to change things for yourself. So we can change if we don't want certain genes expressed by modifying our lifestyle habits along the way. We also have an impact on mood and cognition and brain health in general. So your gut is a nervous system hub. It contains 500 million nerves. So think about that, right? That's a heck of a lot of nerves. Hormones are also impacted by gut health. So hormones that influence the brain get produced here. So 90% of the serotonin, you might think of serotonin as that feel-good hormone. So 90% of the serotonin that is made in your body is actually made in your gut. 50% of the dopamine is made in the gut, and along with many other neurotransmitters. So we can see now how gut can impact our brain health. So that's one of the ways that the gut and the brain are connected, so to speak. We hear about gut brain axis or gut brain connection quite a bit now. And that is, hormones are one of the ways that the gut and the brain communicate and do signaling with each other. The other way is something called the vagus nerve, which runs from the brain down to the gut. And so picture that's kind of our physical connection. So picture that like a broadband, fiber optic, high speed internet kind of highway, and signals are being sent from the brain to the gut and from the gut to the brain constantly through that way. So we have our neurotransmitters, plus we have this vagus nerve in our gut being able to send correct information back and forth. So this affects many things. It can affect anxiety and depression and our body's ability to react to that or be more resilient to stress also. Alzheimer's disease and cognitive decline, big area of study now, looking at how the gut can impact development of Alzheimer's disease and cognitive decline with aging, Parkinson's disease as well, ADHD, which is big and much, much more prevalent now. And we do have links between diet and ADHD and also gut. And then brain fog. A lot of people with inflammatory bowel disease know what I'm talking about. If I have people with IBD on here, you may be very familiar with the brain fog that can be associated with IBD. And brain fog is something that people often complain about that I see that are in this gut dysbiosis, where they're having a lot of issues with their gut health. That can be one of those things that they may complain about. And that is a symptom of that gut dysbiosis. So a lot of impacts that we have here with brain health in the gut. So another far-reaching example of gut health. So there was a really great project on the American Gut Project. And they found out some really interesting things out of the American Gut Project. This is something you can also Google, American Gut Project, to read a little bit more into this. But one of the biggest things that came out of this was the single greatest predictor of a healthy gut microbiome was the diversity of plants in your diet. So diversity of plants coming in through the diet, and we'll talk about why that is here in a little bit, equals diversity of microbes in your gut. So we'll dig into that, like I said, here in a few minutes. So it's very interesting, here in the United States, we're in this predicament of being overfed but undernourished. You think, well, how can that be? How can I be overfed and undernourished? Because we are not eating foods primarily that contain nutrient density and the nutrients that are critical for a healthy, functioning gut. So we need to change that. We need to change what is coming in through our diet so that we are feeding our body better. So why this diversity of plants? So diversity of plants, plant foods in general, that's where we get our fiber from. We don't get it anywhere else unless from a fiber supplement, but that also is going to be coming from a plant. But that's where fiber is found. We're not going to get it in any of our other foods. So you can see if we have what we call the standard American diet, or the acronym, the SAD diet. It is very much animal protein is the center of the stage, and then we kind of build around that. So we're not getting our balance is way off. We're not getting enough fiber and plant foods coming in onto our plate. So there's lots of types of fiber, some that we have not even discovered yet. But every type of fiber has its own properties. And remember, we said in the beginning of our slides here that there are 39 trillion microbes in our gut, and they all like to eat different types of fiber. So they don't all eat the same thing, just like us, right? Just like all of us. So you might think, okay, can I just eat broccoli and all the time get all the healthy nutrients I need? No. There is not one superfood that you can eat that's going to take care of everything for your body. So we need to stop thinking about singular foods as superfoods, because that distracts us. That distracts us from the bigger picture of bringing in all of these different nutrients from these plant foods, especially. So, right here in the United States, we have this mindset of, well, if a little of this is good, then more must be better, right? We must have more. So if we take this attitude with foods, then we're going to be missing out if we're just focusing on the same, 3 or 4 quote unquote superfoods. So what I would call a superfood is fiber, and that comes from all of our plant foods. So fiber is our superfood. So you can spread that word. So diversity of plants equals diversity of the fiber coming in, and that equals diversity of the microbes living in our gut. So here it is laid out for you a little bit more here. We're going to dig a little bit more. So the fiber that I was talking about in the last slide, that's our prebiotics. You might be hearing a little bit more about prebiotics now. We've got supplements out now that have prebiotics, of course. But ideally, we want to be getting our prebiotics mostly from our foods, from our plant foods. So the prebiotics coming in through those foods feeds the healthy microbes. Those would be called our probiotics. A lot of you may only know probiotics as a supplement in a pill form in a bottle. But probiotics are actually living in your gut already. And we need to nourish them. So even if you are taking a probiotic supplement, but you are not changing your diet, right? You're not bringing in fiber through your diet in a diverse way, then you're never feeding your probiotics. So we never get to where we can unlock what they actually are capable of doing, which is producing postbiotics. So these well-fed, healthy probiotics produce postbiotics, and these are actually what we call short-chain fatty acids, these postbiotics. We're going to talk about those more on the next slide. But that's where most of us don't have enough of these postbiotics getting produced, and that's really problematic. So let's look at the next slide and see why that is. So our postbiotics, we'll refer to our postbiotics as postbiotics. I won't say short chain fatty acids every time, but postbiotics. So our short chain fatty acids do amazing work in our gut. And this is what we desperately need. That's the whole point of eating the fiber, nourishing those probiotics so that we can get them to produce more and more of these. So the reason they're so fantastic, remember when we talked about dysbiosis and how we get this very inflammatory picture in the gut when we have dysbiosis. And that means we have these more unfriendly bacterial strains that are flourishing and they're dominant. and we're feeding into them with our processed foods and our animal protein heavy diet that's lacking in fiber, we have an imbalance. And so postbiotics are needed to suppress the more inflammatory bacteria in the gut. We need them there to restore balance. So we can't really hope to restore balance unless we have this whole prebiotics feeding the probiotics, producing postbiotics. So they can prevent the growth of inflammatory bacteria. They can help reverse that gut dysbiosis maybe that we're struggling with. So the way they do this is those postbiotics make the colon more acidic, which helps to prevent that growth of the inflammatory bacteria, the bad guys. In reversing dysbiosis, those postbiotics help to strengthen your intestinal barrier. So think of the postbiotics and the probiotics as kind of your guards, right, at that gut wall. And they're the ones that get to decide when they're there and they're built up, they get to decide what gets through that gut wall and doesn't. So they're the protectors. They're the ones keep getting our gut wall nice and tight, like we saw in those first slides. We want it nice and tight, so things that shouldn't get through can't. So a little bit more on postbiotics. So these postbiotics have other healing effects. So this is when we talked about immunity and the immune system living on that other side of the wall, those postbiotics are used to communicate with your immune system. So that's much how that communication happens, to turn down the immune response when it gets out of control, and also help pick up that immune response when it's not working as well. The postbiotics also inhibit some of our most powerful inflammatory pathways in our body. A couple of these worth noting would be nuclear factor kappa B. You don't need to remember that. I'm not going to test you. But nuclear factor kappa B, which is NFKB, and then TNF alpha, which is tumor necrosis factor alpha. These are a couple of inflammatory pathways that are, when they're kicked off chronically, this is where we get in trouble with developing chronic disease, especially cancer, with one of those pathways. So we don't want these pathways being fired off all the time and being in this state of chronic inflammation happening, right? So acute inflammation is necessary. We need acute inflammation for healing wounds and other infections that we might fall victim to. We need that. That's when the immune system needs to kick in, but it's when it doesn't stop, right? There's no regulation happening there, and it goes in that overdrive and then results in this chronic inflammation. So it's much like if, let's say I got up, hopefully I'm not jinxing myself, but let's say I got up off of my chair and I banged my shin on the side of my cabinet, right? And I got maybe a nice big cut. I got a wound there, and we'll see it get nice and red, maybe swollen, it might hurt. Well, let's say I did that every day, because maybe I'm just that clumsy, right? Let's say every day I got up and I kept hitting my leg in the same spot. It's not going to heal, right? So this is what chronic inflammation looks like in your body, where we never get really the stop to it. It's supposed to be acute, not a chronic picture that's happening. So that's how we see some of these chronic diseases results and we start struggling with. So we can also reverse dysbiosis. So we can reverse that bacterial endotoxin from leaking out. We can optimize our immune system. We also have these postbiotics that can help improve blood sugar regulation. So there's how we do a little bit of work in that metabolism as well, and prevent glucose intolerance too. So working on, especially important if you have diabetes or prediabetes, to be thinking about your gut health, because that's important, and helping you manage that disease better. So let's talk about what we should feed our gut. Because, all right, this is really great, Krista, right? I'm learning about the gut and how it functions and why it's important, but what should I do? What should I eat to start improving my gut health now? So lots of things you can do. So let's first talk about where we've gone wrong. How did we get here in the first place? So we talked about the SAD diet, that standard American diet. So here's a picture of what I was talking about, where the majority of our diet and the calories that we're eating are being taken up by processed foods, lots of animal products, and even a lot of those animal products being highly processed. And you see we have this small sliver of fruits and vegetables, like 7%. It's so sad, right? So we want to change this diagram here. We want those fruits and vegetables to take up much more space on this. So here's a few big reasons why we've gotten to the place that we are. So food additives. Food additives have definitely crept into our food system over the last several decades. So originally, these food additives were meant to keep things from spoiling, right? So the food system developed, and it was really developed and built to feed the masses, number one. Also, number two, for profit, which has kind of come along over the years. So originally, it was meant to keep things from spoiling so they could sit on the shelf longer. So we could feed the masses. Food could sit around and it wouldn't go bad, right? Because it was expensive. I mean, and it still is, right? So we don't want our food going bad. So imagine what this does to the microbes that are living in your gut. If these are added to kill bacteria, also happens when they reach your gut. So they're not going to discriminate. These additives and some of these things that get added aren't going to discriminate and just go after your bad bacteria. Going to go after both and wiping out the good guys. So that's one way. When we're eating a diet that contains a lot of processed foods, less manufactured foods, and less of our whole foods, then we're not doing our gut any favor in that way too. We already know we're not doing our gut favors when we're not getting fiber in, but also what else are we adding to that? Farming practices have changed dramatically. Plant foods actually have their own microbiome, and that benefits your microbiome when you eat those plant foods. So the major increase in the use of pesticides and herbicides over the last several decades, it never really allows the plant to fully develop its microbiome and survive. So the same thing happens when you ingest those foods with herbicides and pesticides. So something we need to be thinking about for the health of our gut. If we're trying to take care of our health and we're trying to eat healthier and we're trying to live better, we need to think about that. Also, the overuse of antibiotics in animal farming. So this is something that's happened more and more over the last few decades, where actually the majority of antibiotics in the world globally are used in animal farming and not for people. And that's problematic because when you eat those animal proteins, those antibiotics still remain in that end product. And we know that. And that's where we've seen these links with these super bacteria. So I think one of the first big ones was MRSA, right? And we saw that there was a link there with this development of this antibiotic resistant bacteria. And that's a real thing. So you want to think about, where am I getting my animal products from? Put some thought into and doing some research into where your food comes from. We're so separated from it, right? Where it's kind of like out of sight, out of mind. I don't know. It just gets to the store and it shows up, right? We need to really think about where we're getting that from and how were those animals raised. We're including those in the diet. Also, our sedentary lifestyle. So exercise is something that's really important in our gut health. We think of exercise, of course, for our heart health, maybe helping us manage our weight, but it also can change the gut microbiome and help increase that postbiotic production that those probiotics do. So that's another way. So we have fiber as one of the ways that are doing that, And then we also have exercise that comes in and helps those microbes produce more postbiotics. Also helps improve your intestinal wall integrity. So we've actually seen studies now that we have in the last couple of years that have shown a 40% increase in healthy microbes with exercise. So move. And good news is that these studies were done with walking as the exercise. So I think that's really cool. You don't have to go out and train for a marathon to get these benefits whatsoever. Walking and increasing your movement throughout the day can have a big benefit in your gut health. So once again, and the last one is we're not getting enough fiber. So that's another place we've gone wrong. And we can see that here in our picture on our slide, that we are not getting enough fiber. So an unhealthy microbiome. So how does an unhealthy microbiome play out? So it can definitely work against you. So we can be feeding into the bad bugs instead of feeding our good guys. So couple of consequences as a result of this. So a team of researchers at a Cleveland clinic actually built off of some earlier research where they identified a chemical compound that's called TMAO that is measured in our bloodstream. So this is, as you see on the slide, trimethylamine N oxide, TMAO, much easier, right? So this compound is a strong predictor of having cardiac problems such as a heart attack, stroke. So where does this TMAO come from? You're like, I don't want any, right? It's probably what you're thinking right now. So it's a chemical that's produced by your gut microbiome during when you're digesting food. So the microbes there, the unfriendly microbes, produce the TMA part, the trimethylamine, which then gets absorbed by your gut, and then it goes to the liver and gets turned into TMAO. So you can actually measure how much TMAO is in your system by a simple blood test. And they're doing more of this down at Cleveland Clinic now. TMAO is important. We don't want high levels of TMAO circulating around in our blood because high levels can reduce the removal of our bad cholesterol. So think of like our LDL cholesterol. It can reduce the removal of that from our arteries, which means that we get increased buildup of this in our arteries. And we know that leads to a heart attack or stroke. So this is one way that TMAO levels can predict this increased risk. TMAO has also been linked to kidney failure so far, liver dysfunction, colon cancer, type 2 diabetes. So in order to make TMAO, your microbiome has to have you eating foods that are rich in 2 amino acids, carnitine and choline. These are found mostly very rich in red meat, eggs, and dairy fat specifically. So when we remove these foods from the diet, TMAO levels drop off to 0. So in fact, on a plant-based diet, your TMAO levels may drop to 0, and then your gut microbiome might actually lose its ability to produce TMAO altogether. Very, 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 very good thing. So in a study that they did, they had a guy that had been on a completely plant-based diet for quite some time, and they got him to agree to eat an 8-ounce steak. So remember, our steak, red meat, is a rich source of carnitine and choline. So the result was his TMAO levels did not increase. So his plant-based diet actually gave him some protection. His microbiome had stopped even producing the TMA. So after 5 years without meat, eggs, and dairy, which is what this guy was, his microbiome had lost that ability to manufacture that substance. Further studies have shown that if he continues to eat meat and eggs, his microbiome will change. And he'll once again be able to produce that TMAO. And then he loses one of the benefits of his plant-based diet. So you can change the microbiome, right? We can manipulate the microbiome in both ways, good and bad. So the more we're feeding in plant foods, and if we have animal protein in our diet, we just want to shift that balance so that the animal protein isn't the star of the plate. We want to shift that balance so we're including a lot more of these plant foods so we can start to feed the gut and help the gut heal. So not only can we feel better, but we can extend our health span. So if you have underlying dysbiosis, it can take longer to change your microbiome. We're going to talk about this on the very last slide here, so I'm going to hold off on that. But this is a really great example how microbiome health goes even beyond the gut, and it has a very important role in our overall health, our total body health. So what we want to do, we don't want to feed bacteria and get TMAO and bacterial endotoxin. We want short chain fatty acids, right? We want more postbiotics. Give us more. They're the VIP in the body. All right, so let's break down fiber a little bit. So you might be thinking, well, fiber, okay, I just take some Metamucil or something and call it good. That's not what I want you to leave thinking today. So let's talk about our different types of fiber. So 2 really different types that we kind of break it down into. And then of course, there's lots and lots of different fibers underneath these, but these are our 2 big categories. So soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. So soluble fiber, this is our kind of our golden child. This is our mostly prebiotics. So food for the microbes, we've already learned, right? Our prebiotics. This is where we're going to really get most of those prebiotics from. So soluble fiber dissolves in water. So it's really nice when it gets down to the gut and the bacteria are digesting it and they're fermenting it. And it helps move stool through really nicely because it kind of turns gel-like in the colon and helps stool move through. So short list here, there's lots more foods that we find this in. Almost all of our plant foods have a combination of soluble and insoluble fiber in it. But some good examples would be oats, fantastic soluble fiber there, really great for your gut. Beans and legumes, nuts, seeds, berries. So not, like I said, not an all-inclusive list. So really all of our plant foods have this nice combination, but those are some all-stars there. Insoluble fiber, this is going to be what we often call roughage. So this is the stuff that doesn't dissolve in water. It really passes through relatively undigested. We want to make sure that we chew our food really thoroughly so that if you're seeing pieces in your stool, you're not chewing enough, number one. But this gives bulk to our stool. So helps it be nice and formed and helps it move through too. We find this in things like whole grains. And then I just want to illustrate again, only plants have fiber. So only plants will you find soluble fiber and insoluble fibers. This is why we need to change the balance of what's showing up on our plate. Okay, so we need fiber, but how much do we actually need? So one of the most important things is we need a steady, consistent supply of that fiber. So a healthy microbiome is going to require a very steady supply of a variety, right? Here's this diversity of fiber coming in again, of a variety of fiber from a rich variety of plants. So like we saw in one of our previous slides, we're only getting about 7, maybe 9, if we're lucky, % of our caloric intake coming from fruits and vegetables. And even these are often reported in some of these surveys as things like jams and jellies, right? And juices, that's my fruit intake, and other processed snack foods. Doesn't really count, but they're counting it into that. So we're actually doing a little bit worse than what those numbers reflect. So most people here in the United States are getting on a good day around 15 grams of fiber, and that's on a good day. Most people are falling well below that on average. Where we need to be is to be consuming around 30 grams of fiber per day at least. So the more plant foods you introduce, and if you start thinking about diversity of plants and start trying to include more of that, you'll find it's really easy to boost those fiber numbers up when you're including more plant foods. So the more diverse the microbiome we saw, the healthier we can be and the lower the risk for chronic disease. So really interesting. The Hadza people of Tanzania actually consume this traditional diet where they get 100 grams of fiber per day. And they have the most diverse microbiome that's ever been studied. And this is thanks to their fiber-rich, plant-rich diet, which is also, though, unlike us, free of processed foods. So they also have virtually none of the Western diseases that we struggle with, like obesity, heart disease, inflammatory bowel disease, diabetes, cancers, right? We can go on and on. So one thing I want you to take away is we talk a lot about increasing our fiber, but what we're really talking about is these fibers from these foods that our microbiome can access. So I like to call this MAX. These are microbiome accessible carbohydrates. So carbs are not bad. So carbs are good. We should not be eliminating carbs in the long term, because if we do that, we're mortgaging our gut health over the long term. You may not notice it right away, but it's happening. And I get a lot of people who are on a keto diet for longer term than they should be, really. And it comes at the expense of their gut over time. So we need to be thinking about that. If we're eliminating carbs, that means we're eliminating the food for our guts. And that is not what we want to do. So think about including carbs, but the right kinds of carbs from our plant foods, fruits, vegetables, whole grains, beans and legumes, nuts and seeds. Get more of these in your diet so that you're feeding your gut appropriately so it can function for you. So even going beyond fiber, soluble fiber is not the only prebiotic out there, though it's probably the one that is most prevalent. But we also see foods that are high in phytonutrients, which, if you're unfamiliar with that term, are plant nutrients. But we see these foods that are high in phytonutrient polyphenols, which is just a class of these phytonutrients. They act like prebiotics for our microbes. So some that you see listed here, so cocoa, so like dark cocoa or cacao powder, green tea, apples with the skin on, that's key, blueberries, and also other berries, pomegranates, which are in season now, and omega-3 fats in general. A really great source is walnuts. Also ground flax seeds are another great source, chia seeds, hemp seeds. Those all can feed our gut really nicely and help the microbiome produce more of those postbiotics that we're desperately wanting. So what should you eat? So here's your slide for those of you that have been waiting for this. So here's what you should eat. So F goals. This is from Dr. William Bolsowitz, who wrote the book Fiber Fueled. If you haven't checked that out, I highly recommend it. He also has a second book called the Fiber Fueled Cookbook, so check that out as well. But he came up with these F goals, and I love them because that kind of helps us remember. So fruit, especially berries, right? Because we saw they have a little bit of a leg up with some of these great nutrients. So fruit. G is our greens and our grains. So get rid of the refined grains. Put a lot of greens in. So kale, collard greens, chard, mustard greens, arugula, dandelion greens, spinach, even the greens of our root vegetables like beet greens, radish greens. Omega-3s, that's our O. So omega-3s, like I mentioned on the previous slide, flax is a great source of this. Also our chia, our walnuts are an excellent source. Hemp seeds are another excellent source as well for these omega-3s, but we also get other nutrient density that comes along with this. That's why I love plant foods, because it's not just one thing. We're getting a whole host of other disease fighters that are coming in. And then our aromatics is our A. This would be garlic and onions, that whole family. So a lot of you might go, oh, I can't eat garlic and onions. And that is a sign that you're in some state of dysbiosis in your gut because you don't have the microbes kind of built up and ready and help to digest those compounds that are coming in from garlic and onions. That's kind of a red flag to me when somebody tells me that. But these are actually very powerful for your gut. So it can take some time to get your gut built up and stronger to handle some of these things. Legumes, so beans and legumes, really fantastic. That's a great foundation, good protein source, major prebiotic fiber here in our beans and legumes. And then last but certainly not least is sulforaphane, which is a phytonutrient, powerful cancer crusher, capable of reducing pathogenic bacteria and that bacterial endotoxin that we talked about. Also shown to increase postbiotics. So we can find this in cruciferous vegetables like cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower, Brussels sprouts. One of our best sources is actually broccoli sprouts of sulforaphane because you're eating it raw. So that's a really great one. If you haven't started adding broccoli sprouts, I highly recommend that you do. You can grow them at home and it makes it super easy and cheap. So think about doing that too, that you can grow super nutrient dense vegetables right in your own kitchen year round. So here's some top tips to build a healthy microbiome. So we already learned a variety of plants is absolutely necessary. We learned that out of the American Gut Project. So in general, about 30 unique plant foods throughout the course of a week is what they showed to be a predictor of an optimal healthy gut microbiome. So this sounds like a lot, but it's a lot easier than you may think. Start counting the plant points when you're cooking a meal, how many plants you have. Herbs and spices count as part of this. But unique is the key word here, meaning we don't want to get stuck in the same 5 or 10 foods that we just rotate over and over again. Then we don't have that diversity. Also, getting enough sleep. Our microbiome works on our body clock, the same as the rest of our body. So when we're not getting good sleep, we have sleep deprivation, our microbiome is going to suffer, and we will see a loss of diversity as a result of that, and that can impact our gut health. Exercise, like we talked about, right? That can help us get more of those postbiotics produced, help those microbes out. Bonus points if you spend that time outdoors. Getting out in nature helps a ton to be able to produce those postbiotics. And then, of course, avoiding unnecessary antibiotics when we can, so that we're not destroying that gut microbiome. So here's our last slide. So this is building a strong microbiome in how long? So the microbiome needs at least 28 days to start to shift. And so it needs to have time to adapt to the fiber, get your digestive enzymes going to help process that fiber, and also see an increase in our short chain fatty acid or our postbiotic production. Underlying gut dysbiosis can make it take longer for you to build up the strength of your microbiome. So it depends where you're starting from. What is the degree of gut dysbiosis? So it's not going to be the same amount of time for everybody. And the 28 days is not the end all be all whatsoever. So it may take longer if you have other things going on with your gut health. So be patient, give yourself some grace, but no matter what, add more plant foods to your diet. Okay. So I'm going to unshare so I can see Elizabeth here, because I know there's probably some questions. So
Hi,
hopefully I
Krista.
left enough time.
Hi, Krista. Yes, there is a sea of questions,
Okay.
but we will just get to a couple today. And obviously, people can always, if they want to have specific, medical questions and things like that answered, they can always schedule an appointment at the practice with the lifestyle medicine practice and meet with you individually. So I've kind of highlighted some that might be more kind of broad covering for all different people. I think someone said it well, which was just like wonderful presentation. That was fabulous. Um, and they just asked, like, how much fiber does an adult need per day? And then on that, someone also said, is there a thing of too much fiber in a day?
Yeah,
Mm.
that's a great question. So about 30 grams of fiber at least is where we want to shoot for as a really good amount to start feeding our gut microbes. As far as too much fiber, I think it's pretty impossible to get too much because fiber's filling. And that's why I always recommend to people, if you're trying to lose weight, include more foods that contain fiber and that bulk that helps you feel full sooner so that you're eating less as well, but it will fill you up. So I don't think you're going to be at risk of eating too many beans because they're super filling. You'll find that. So really no worries there, I don't think. Look at the heads of people, 100 grams of fiber a day. So
Yeah, yeah, that's a lot.
yeah.
And then someone also asked about examples of fermented foods and what would be some
Yeah,
that
yes.
you
I
would
didn't have
suggest.
time to put all my fermented good stuff on here, but yes, fermented foods are phenomenal, especially if you're struggling with getting more fiber in. If you have a lot of problems with some of these fiber containing foods, fermented foods can be a good place to begin because fermented foods not only have the probiotics being delivered into the gut, but you also typically get some prebiotics. So think of like kimchi or sauerkraut. We're getting both prebiotics and probiotics. So we're populating the gut with the probiotics by including a fermented food, which is helpful to get more of them to do some good work for you. So then when you do start to increase more fiber containing foods, it can be easier for you to handle that. So that's a great place to begin with fermented foods.
Wonderful. Another question was asked around, well, another great comment that this is such a great presentation, but just asked, how does alcohol affect the microbiome?
Love that. Thank you for asking that question, whoever asked that. Yes, alcohol will significantly impact your gut microbiome. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. And I know that's a tough topic for a lot of people because, we sometimes we depend on alcohol to have like fun times and all of that stuff. But yes, if you are trying to create a healthy gut, or maybe you're trying to correct dysbiosis and you're struggling, alcohol will challenge you at every step because alcohol kills bacteria. Think of hand sanitizer, right? It kills bacteria and it's going to kill the good and the bad. Once again, something that's not going to discriminate when it gets into the gut. So it's going to consistently keep working. Even if you're trying to put good stuff in the diet, that's going to continue to come in there and put up a hurdle for you. So definitely something you want to take a holiday from. If you're trying to really work on your gut, I would highly recommend that you take a break from that to see how you feel.
Great, thank you. That's helpful.
Yeah.
Another person asked, will people experience any negative slash detox type symptoms when they transition to kind of this more high fiber type diet?
Sure, definitely possible. Especially with sugar. That's the big one. Sugar, we see real actual detox symptoms from people coming off of sugar. If you have a lot of that in your diet over a long period of time, then yes, you can feel cruddy for a bit. And that's normal because your body, your brain is kind of withdrawing from that because sugar acts on the same receptors in your reward center of your brain like alcohol and drugs do. So we can experience some similar effects. It's not dangerous, like if you're withdrawing from alcohol and drugs, but you'll feel it if you have a lot of that in. But stick with it. Stick with it. Make it through. Usually it's just a few days. And I promise on the other side, it's great.
Well, I know too, like in our practice, I think we have that 10-day palate reset, which can
Yeah.
be
Yeah.
helpful for people. I mean, you really hear that from people who start to make that change that eventually they get used to like the lower sugar, lower
Yeah.
salt flavors, and it takes time to make that transition.
Just gotta have patience with yourself and your palate.
Yes, yeah. Um, and then another question was asked around, you're talking about the TMAO and asking does seafood and fish products contain that TMAO?
Um, so yeah, so remember the foods don't contain the TMAO, they contain um kind of the building blocks of TMAO, right? Where we feed the gut and then kind of provides those missing pieces. So yes, to an extent, we have choline and carnitine that are present in our animal products, but not as rich a source as our red meat, our eggs, and our dairy, especially highly processed dairy.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then just one last question, because I know we're at time, but people might be curious. Is there a way that people might test or know if they have this leaky gut or dysbiosis? How would they maybe go about figuring that out?
Yes, we don't have great testing yet. There are a couple of companies that are doing studies on stool studies. So looking at what strains make up your microbiome. And so I think we're going to see a lot of that in the next, 10 years, where we can really fine tune things better with diet. But right now, there aren't any really great ways. It's symptomatic mostly. For me, I dig really deep. If you meet with me as a patient, we dig really deep into kind of, what's been going on, how long, all these factors that influence the development of this, because it doesn't happen overnight. And we take a look at your diet. But yeah, very much based on bowel patterns, what is happening there, what are the symptoms. We can usually tell a lot from that. And so that's our biggest indicator. So yes, definitely see an expert if you're concerned about this, because it is helpful to have somebody walk you through the process to repairing your gut for sure.
Okay. Well, Krista, this was a phenomenal presentation. There's so many great comments. We couldn't get to all the questions and comments in the chat, but lots of great comments, people just really enjoying the presentation. So we're thankful to everyone that joined us today. And obviously this is recorded, so you can always watch it later if you want to review any of the content that Krista shared. But Krista, thank you so much. And we hope everybody has a fabulous rest of the day.
Thanks for having me. Wish we could talk for several more hours, because I know I could.
Yeah.
Thanks for listening,
Thank
everybody.
you.
So glad to have you. Thank you.
Take care.
Bye
Bye.
bye.